Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. It's early Sunday morning here in the deep south, and I am enjoying this cool weather. Just got out of the shower. If you hear a bunch of noise, it's people waking up, dogs moving around, all that good jazz. So I'll do the best I can to clean up all that interference before releasing this episode. I recorded it yesterday, but I was running. I had been going for, 16 hours at that time, and I was not mentally all there, which some would argue that I'm never mentally all there, so it was even worse than normal. So I'm gonna take another swing at this and try to get it out there, get the information out there as clearly as possible. I want to be concise with my language and the way that I'm trying to describe the situations that I'm trying to describe. So I don't want to be too clumsy and leave too much room for questioning on what I'm trying to get across. So with that being said, the first thing I want to cover is 2019 and what will Stranger Encounters be doing in 2019. I took a couple of weeks off. I have another interview I'll be releasing next week, and I advise you to stay tuned and listen to that one with Andrew Schneck. He's worked starting clinics fighting the opioid crisis, and it's going to be a really good interview, and you'll really enjoy hearing his story and the things he's trying to do. Oh yeah, coffee. So 2019, I want to do something different. As you notice, the music has changed, and that's some music a friend of mine had sent to me, and he had sampled probably, 3 years ago or something. Oh no, it was longer than that. It was 2014 when he sent it to me. So there you go. And it was something that I always kind of dug the song, and you stay tuned till after the program, just like with the Deadline song. You'll hear more of the song at the end. So, and the reason I did that is because of the YouTube's policies on copyright, and I want to make sure that when I get to a point to where I can begin to incorporate advertisers, I'm not being stopped for a copyright violation. It has nothing to do with Deadline. They're wonderful guys, and I really appreciate them allowing me to use their music. I also want to try some more creative stuff and get more into the things that I'm really, really interested in writing and things of that nature. And I want to do this with individuals that have made some sort of difference in the lives of people or in the world. I'm working on the first one right now. I don't know how often I'll be releasing these because it takes a while. Like with my schedule driving a truck, it takes a while to write stuff. And I'm also working on another article for the Libertarian Institute and hoping that it will get put out there. If you missed it, I released an article in the Libertarian Institute discussing bringing the troops home. And I think it's titled Bring the Troops Home. And it's on my website, so you can go and read it. It was published in December. I'm also working on getting some really exciting guests in the next couple of months. Some people that a lot of y'all have heard of, and some of you haven't, but it's going to be really interesting guests discussing really interesting topics. We'll get into that as we get closer to the times. I'm kind of scanning over notes as I go, so the pauses are just kind of making sure that I stay on track and don't get too far off. I might do some specific short stories, maybe some short stories I wrote in the past, break down what they mean, what they're all about, why I wrote them, how I feel they're relevant, based upon what I've learned since writing them, mistakes I may have made, or, foreshadowing I may have instinctively gripped onto. And maybe some book reviews and things like that. Just some more things that I find interesting, history and things of that nature. So the interviews won't stop, but there will be more single sessions like this where you get to hear me stumble over words and try to figure out how I want to, incorporate my thoughts into a verbal pattern. So today I'm gonna do something a little bit different in the fact that I'm going to discuss something that's topical in the news. Actually, a couple of things. And I hope that I bring a fresh perspective. And I encourage y'all to write to me, comment. Let me know what y'all think. If I'm mistaken, why I'm mistaken. And, we'll see, how that discussion goes in the future. And maybe I'll put one of you on here to argue with me or something. So the first order of business, where's my gavel? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All right. And excuse me, more coffee. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and not for the reasons that she's in the news. I actually, I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on her. And it's not about her in general. It's about what she represents. And not politically. In the traditional sense of the word politically. It's more socially and culturally. Now, there was a video that came out of her dancing. I think they were redoing the dance from the Breakfast Club. And I watched it and I was like, oh, that's cute. Like whatever. Like I loved the Breakfast Club growing up. Like it's a classic movie. It's, I don't know. I always liked the movie. And so there were people, I don't know, they were like, oh, she looks like a fool, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, no, she actually looks like a person. She looks like just a cute, I don't know how old she was, like, teenager or after teenager, but she's having a good time with her friends and she's doing, things that people do, in their youth. And it was harmless. So I started thinking about what does this mean for politics? And I had kind of thought of it, but I hadn't really thought of it until this happened. See, she's the first congressperson of the social media generation. And, I don't know when Facebook got started. I guess I could have looked that up. I think it was in the early 2000s. But if she's 29 years old, so that means that she was 11, 12, 13 years old whenever all that started. So she grew up, at least through high school, dealing with social media and having her life out there in public. And this is something we're going to see more often as time goes by. I suspect we'll see a lot more Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes in the sense that you'll have old videos of teenagers doing silly things when they were teenagers. Maybe some videos of teenagers doing not so silly things. But what it made me think of is you're actually getting to see her as a person, unlike Elizabeth Warren, as much as she tries to look like a person. Unlike Hillary Clinton, unlike Donald Trump. And I think this was the appeal to Donald Trump. People felt like they knew him. Not the full appeal, but this part of the appeal. This was a slight bit of the appeal because they felt like he was a real person, and that you had all this video going back of him being on television. And I've heard other people say this, so this isn't an original thought here. But so they kind of felt like he was part of their lives in a way, and so they already knew who he was in a general sense, even though reality television isn't reality. So I would think that what we're starting to see with the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez situation is what it's going to be like as new Congress people come in and run for office. And it's going to be less about what, like, their immutable characteristics and more about their past. And we're going to have more access to their past and what they were like growing up and this, that, and the other. And that's exciting in some ways. I think it's going to do away with a lot of the identity politics. I think you're going to have a lot less identity politics because you're actually going to see these people as individuals, the mistakes they made, their sense of humor, and them as a person, and someone that, doesn't. You're either going to find them likable or unlikable, and you're not going to be able to say that saying somebody is unlikable is sexist, which is something you hear going around right now, which I find silly because I find Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez extremely likable. She seems like a free spirit and a fun woman, but I find her politics dangerous. Unfortunately, I don't feel like this aspect cures the problem of the country. Just because we'll be able to get away from identity politics in some way, probably majorly so. I don't feel like it fixes what the problem is with elections being popularity contests. I feel like it might add on to the fact that it's going to be more about popularity, less about policy. People are going to pay a lot less attention to what you say and more to, your cute little cat videos or whatever the hell you were posting on social media. So in some ways I think it's going to be a good thing, but in some ways I think we really still need to be on our guard about how we view politicians and politics, because I think voting, I think voting is bad, period. But I think voting for somebody based upon their, if you like them or not, or and not on policy, I think that's very dangerous, and I think that can lead down some really dark roads. So that's kind of my thoughts on that, and yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about that. I think this is turning out to be more interesting than I thought it was going to be, as far as a cultural experiment and how people begin interacting with politicians based upon social media experiences and their footprint or fingerprint or whatever you want to call it on social media. So that's going to be interesting going forward to see how that plays into politics and into the world in which we live. So now I'm going to get into the wall, or not even the wall so much, but immigration. All right. And most of you know that my wife is not from America. She's from South Africa. And I've had to deal with the immigration system. I know what the immigration system is. I know how it works, and it sucks. It is the worst system in the world. And just as an example, we spent, just to get her here and apply for the green card, we spent near $8,000. And 2 years later, we have to re-register her green card. A little piece of plastic. and they sent us a letter telling us it's going to cost $540 to do this. And so we filed it in September. And we get a letter back in December saying that now we owe them $675 or something like that. And we're like, what the hell? So she calls these people. And come to find out, they had sent her the wrong information. And so she had filed the wrong form. And they don't recognize that we sent them that $540. And that now we have to actually file the correct form. As if we're made of money. And this is plain out extortion. In the private sector, if this were going on, there would be lawsuits flying. These people would, the company would be held to account for misleading their customers. And we deal with this with the U.S. government all the time, and we act like it's the norm. Like it's just the way things are. And it kind of sucks because the people you talk to on a regular basis about the wall or about immigration policy, most of them will admit the government is completely incompetent. They can't accomplish anything in an efficient manner. Yet they want the government to take more of their money to do things like this. Now, I might come off a little preachy on this subject, and I don't want to. What I'm trying to do is give you insight as to how my brain works and how I look at these things. I try to be principled. I try to turn to history. I try to see what history has to offer me. And I try to make decisions based on that. And disclaimer, I'm not an intellectual. I'm a truck driver. And I just have a lot of time to think about things. I have a lot of time to think about things. I have a lot of time to listen to other podcasts, listen to documentaries, listen to political speeches and different philosophers and thought shapers of the 20th century. And I try to absorb these things and I try to make it as applicable to my life as possible. Because these people are a lot smarter than me. And so I'm not trying to be smarter than I am. I'm trying to be as informed as possible, though. I don't believe just because I have an opinion on something, it's the right opinion. And actually, I tend to lean towards Ludwig von Mises' view on value in this situation. And I've been reading, among many other things, I've been reading Theory and History by Ludwig von Mises. And if I can get this to open up, I will go exactly to where I want. But there's a quote in here I thought was really interesting. And my Kindle is running slow, so I'm having trouble getting the PDF open. But he basically says that value is subjective, and the judgment of value is dependent on the individual that's holding judgment. That's judging the value. So when somebody uses a term like free, bad, good, these are words of value. You're determining value through your language. And here's the quote. It just popped up. It's in section 3 of the first chapter. The subjectivity of valuation, and it's the first sentence. All judgments of value are personal and subjective. There are no judgments of value other than those asserting, I prefer, I like better, I wish. In the second paragraph, it cannot be denied by anybody that various individuals disagree widely with regard to their feelings, tastes, and preferences, and that even the same individuals at various instants of their lives value the same things in a different way. In view of this fact, it is useless to talk about absolute and eternal values. And I agree with him there. When you have somebody who's discussing, who wants to talk about morality, immorality, well, they're discussing that through their lens of how they value these acts. They're not discussing that through some objective form. Now, I know some of you are going to bring up murder. Well, there are murderers out there who do not value human life. And you can't say that their idea of value is any less important in the world than yours. Because in many ways, their value, the way they view human life, and how much they value human life, has more of an impact on more people than your view of human life. In many ways. And by saying it's immoral, which I believe that it is immoral, but that's my value of human life. It's the way I see human life. I'm not a murderer. I'm not George W. Bush or Barack Obama. You know, I actually value human life, no matter where that life is from. So when you're discussing these things, you have to make clear what your definition or your value is when having these conversations with other people. And I think this is a big problem in today's society. When you're discussing serious concerns in the world, you're using language of value to describe, and I don't particularly see that there's any way to get around that, because that's how language is formed. Language is not an objective description of things. In many ways, language is more hyperbolic than anything, because you're trying to get across a point, and you're trying to make a person see what your point of view is when you're talking to them and you're communicating with them. And that's the word I was looking for. It's communication, and it's the way you communicate through language. Everybody uses language differently, and some people are more hyperbolic in their language. Some people are less hyperbolic. I do try to stick to facts, and I try to be less emotional when I'm on the podcast. At least it doesn't always work. So when I start looking at the immigration argument, that's the first thing I look at is the language being used. And what units of value are being used in the discussion says a lot about the person that you're talking to. And some people you just can't talk to, you know? Was that Cool Hand Luke? What we've got here is failure to communicate. So, it was probably a horrible impersonation. I don't know. It sounded pretty redneck to me. And I know my mom's a redneck. Hi, Mom. I know she's listening. She doesn't mind if I pick on her. I only pick on her because I love her. So, when we're discussing the immigration issue, I try to go back to what was the intent of America. Now, America was defined by a set of ideas, not a landmass. And that's why when the president or a politician or someone joining the military takes their oath, they take the oath to defend the Constitution, not the country. Because the country is not what's important. The ideas that shaped the country are what's important. And the first document written that I know of, at least it was written before the Constitution. It was sent to the king, and it was the Declaration of Independence. And we have that first sentence in the Declaration of Independence. And in that sentence, he says, Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal. Okay. So now we have a determination of value there in the word equal and what it means. So are we equal? Are we equal under the law? Are we equal in our stages in life? How are we equal? What does that mean? What does equality mean? And I think that's what we have to determine. What does equality mean? And I think it's, as much as it has a religious connotation to it, I think Locke was a big inspiration on this term being equal. Because Locke was interested in natural rights. And he was writing, he came after Hobbes, and some people say he was answering Hobbes. Some people say he never even read Hobbes. He was definitely, whether he read Hobbes or not, he was definitely working against Hobbes' view of government and society. He definitely wasn't in the camp of we must have a big government to keep things in line. And that was kind of Hobbes' view, that it was just inevitable. And I think what Locke was trying to get at, and the way I read it, and I've heard some professors, I've looked up some professors online to hear them talk about Lockean philosophy. And I think what he was getting at was that you have to examine everything from the natural state. In that man's natural state is in nature. And that in nature you have liberty. And basically you function in nature in a survival form in order to do what you have to do to survive, whether that be farming or hunting, defending yourself, going to war in self-defense. And he gives the impression that his idea of a government is only that organization agreed upon by the populace that ensures more liberty than you're receiving in your natural state. So when you're viewing these things, or when I'm viewing these things, I should say, I'm looking at it, does what government is doing at this moment preserve liberty at a higher rate than I would have in the natural state of things without the government there? Now, this is, again, you get into subjectivity. What is liberty? right? So some will say that liberty is the government providing healthcare, because you have the freedom to not worry about if you get to see a doctor. And this actually should resonate. The argument should resonate with a lot more people on the fact that these people aren't coming from a bad place. Bad being subjective. But their motives, their intentions, I don't think are necessarily bad. I really believe that what they're doing is they're recognizing that material wealth offers an amount of freedom to people. And they're also recognizing that there has been a history of oppression in keeping certain classes of society in place. And I discussed this in my last solo episode, to where I was talking about when you go to school in certain areas, you're expected to perform certain features within society. And that's what you're being trained to do. So I don't look at these people as bad. I look at the ideas as bad. I look at the ideas as not being useful and not furthering liberty. But I understand where these people are coming from. And then you'll have a segment of the population who may say that we were born into a system, a constitutional system that has offered more prosperity and freedom than any other system in the world. And we must go into any country in the world and topple dictators in order to install democracy in a constitutional system. My main problem with that is, number one, you're going to kill people in the idea that you're spreading peace through murder, which seems pretty sociopathic if you ask me. But you're taking away the people in these regions. You're taking away their autonomy. Maybe they like the government they live under. Maybe they're perfectly fine and they living the way they live. It's almost like a modern crusade. You know, you have these people that believe they're good and they're more benevolent than everybody else in society. And it's up to them. They have to force their values upon everybody else. I don't see that as a legitimate argument. Now, you hear a lot of talk about collectivism recently, socialism and communism. But when discussing collectivism, one of the things that nobody ever brings up is nationalism. And nationalism is, in fact, a collectivist ideal. It's the idea that a person's value is determined by their location of birth, and that people born on this piece of dirt are valued at a higher rate than people born on another piece of dirt. And I don't see this as any more. See, I'm trying to stay away from the words of value when describing this, and it's really hard because that's just not the way that language is formed. So I don't look at it as an objective truth that people born in the United States are morally superior to people born in other places. I don't look at it as an objective truth that one culture is better than the others. culture in a lot of ways is based upon history. And Thaddeus Russell wrote a great book on the shaping of American culture called A Renegade History of the United States. And it's a historical view about how culture comes to be and how racism played into it. And it's really, really interesting. I read it last year. I want to read it again. I actually want to break it down and do a show on it. So I'm not going to get too far in detail in that, but I know some of y'all have read it, and it's a great book. So I'm not I can't sit there and judge these cultures. A lot of these cultures are based upon religious doctrines. Some of them are based upon Christianity. Some of them are based upon Islam, but their cultures were shaped by their history and by the regions that they, kind of the mythos and the mythologies that they adhered to historically. Now, I don't know where religion came from. I'm not going to pretend like I did. I think it's useful in some ways. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think these were the world's first philosophers and historians. Maybe not the first ones, but at least very, very astute historians and philosophers that wrote these books. And I'm not just talking about the Bible. I'm talking about all of Plato and Socrates and all these people. But I don't want to get into that right now. I actually plan on doing an episode on the allegory of the cave, which I think would be an interesting episode to do. Anyway, let's move on. I got plenty of notes here to get through. All right. So when I look at it, when I'm looking at the nationalism in the Constitution, and I'm saying, well, nationalism to me, the way I view it, isn't based on an idea. Nationalism is based on a location, whereas the Constitution is based on a set of ideas. And in the Constitution, there's the 14th Amendment, and there's a lot of people that argue against the 14th Amendment. I actually have a book by, I can't remember the guy's name. I'll look it up, about the 14th Amendment and arguing against the 14th Amendment. And he discusses how the 14th Amendment has been used in ways that it was never meant to be used. And he's got some really good arguments in there. It's the 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine by David Benner. And it's really good. It's not a very long book. It's very easy to consume. So if you're interested in that take, I'd suggest you read it. And one of the things in the 14th Amendment that the 14th Amendment's been used in that gets me is it's been used to protect corporations. And Noam Chomsky had a very interesting quote about corporations. And he said something along the lines, and this isn't going to be a direct quote. I need to look more into his thought on this because he's a brilliant mind. And whereas I disagree with him on certain issues, I think he's a brilliant man, and you have to look at where he's coming from and see and really digest his arguments. But he says that corporations are a fictitious, something along the lines of a fictitious organization created by government. And there's a lot of truth to that just in what I can see on the surface level. You have these corporations that have come to be and they've been started and they've been propped up. I mean, you look at just like the Federal Reserve and the banking system has been given its power by the federal government. And these private banks would have the power to create money out of thin air. And they loan this money to the state, to the government. And then our taxes pay the interest on these loans. It's really, really strange. Now, these bankers may have had some power in a natural state, but they would not have near the power they have today if the government weren't propping them up, if the government weren't giving them the power to do these things. Imagine how much power you would have if you had the monopoly on creating money. Imagine how wealthy you would be. Imagine how you could control the world and the way that the financial system worked. So you got to be, when you look at these corporations, yes, people run these corporations, but a corporation in and of itself is not an individual. It's actually an extended arm of the government. Whereas it's writing regulations and sending it in, like you had the insurance companies write the Affordable Care Act. The insurance companies wrote that. Do you think that maybe the Affordable Care Act was leaning more towards the corporations and the insurance companies than it was towards the individuals that needed health care? Do you think maybe they were trying to enrich themselves at the expense of anybody? Yeah. Of course they were. And it's quite fascist to allow these corporations to become an arm of the federal government. You know, Mussolini described fascism as corporatism, in which the state and the corporations are running the society, working in congruence to run the society. So you got to be really careful about this. When you have the United States government bailing out banks that have totally destroyed people's lives, and they knew it was going to happen. And the federal go, oh, they're too big to fail. No, let these guys capsize, man. Let this fall. We don't need these guys running our lives. But they've manipulated the economy in such a way that it feels impossible to retake our individual sovereignty. So you have a system in which the corporations are being protected under the Constitution, and refugees or illegal immigrants or whatever you want to call these people. I don't care what you call them. They're people. They are human. They're not from some galaxy far, far away. And no matter what you want to call these people, they're not being protected. And why not? Because in the 14th Amendment, it says that the United States cannot deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So when you cross over onto somebody's property, which we're not going to even get into the idea that the government owns property, which I think is just a farce in itself. When you cross over into somebody's property, what are you doing? You're trespassing. You haven't destroyed property. You just crossed over onto their property. And I'm all about property rights. I think the only borders that are actual borders that should be recognized are private property borders, not national borders. Which is why I'm on the side of the ranchers down there on the border. Because they're fighting the federal government confiscating their land through eminent domain, which is just forced theft. It's like, you take this money. They're strong arming them. They're acting like, you know, the Giancana family or some shit. You know, Sam Giancana out there fucking strong arming these people out of fucking their resources and their property for his use, to enrich himself, to give himself more power. And if it were anybody else doing it, you would be outraged. Oh, but I know eminent domain is in the Constitution. Well, just because it's written in the Constitution doesn't make it right. Just like the recognizing slavery in the Constitution wasn't right, or any of these other things. And that's a complicated situation. I'm not saying that that was done with ill will by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't necessarily think that it makes it the end all be all. It doesn't make it a perfect document. It might be a more perfect document than a lot of others, a more perfect constitution than a lot of others, but it doesn't make it perfect. So I refuse to blindly accept anything just because it's in the Constitution. But these people are trespassing at best. And so what is the law against trespassing? What is the penalty on trespassing? Well, in most states, it's the law, the max penalty a person can get for trespassing is a $4,000 fine. Now, remember at the beginning, I told you that my wife and I went through this situation. And we've been extorted by the United States government so that she can live and work here. And it cost us around $8,000. So it's like half the price. So they found a discount method into the system. Well, green cards, buy one, get one free. Half off with your first purchase. Why not? Now, I've kind of covered this. It's this in the notes again, but I just want to emphasize here. We live in a country in which the government props up corporations. It subsidizes them. Jeff Bezos just is getting billions of dollars because he's putting new Amazon locations in New York. Billions of dollars from the government, your tax dollars. Well, wait. I think what Jeff Bezos has created in Amazon is fucking amazing. And it makes life so much easier in so many ways. But but I'll spend money voluntarily and he can make his profits off that money. The government should not be subsidizing him, because all you're doing is you're making it harder for companies to compete with him. I mean, how hard is it to compete with the United States government? How much money do you need? And that's basically what you're doing. Jeff Bezos is now funded by the United States government, and they have unlimited funds because they can just ask for money. They can just take your money as at will, and they can spend as much as they want. As we see, $21 trillion in debt, and they haven't slowed down a bit. Can you do that? Do you have the ability to compete with a business that has that kind of funding behind it? I don't see it. So you got these companies subsidized. They're passing favorable regulation. As I covered, a lot of times they're writing the regulations in order to stifle competition, to keep competition from coming up. And they refuse to allow these predatory bankers to capsize whenever they mess up, whenever they destroy their business model. And our issue is low-skilled immigrants, many of which have no money, they have no schooling, they can't speak the language, and they're just looking for an opportunity to survive. Now you go back to Locke and you think about in the natural world, in the natural state of things, these people would be able to go wherever they wanted to go. And you would voluntarily be able to decide whether or not you entered into contract with them or not. Nobody could determine that you're not allowed to enter into contract with them. Nobody would be able to tell you, oh, you can't rent a room to this guy because he's from a different location. Now, a lot of people want to discuss, well, they're smuggling drugs. Well, not all of them are smuggling drugs, but there are individuals, and this is how I look at things. I'm an individualist. There are individuals that are smuggling drugs. But why are they smuggling drugs? Is it because they are bad people? Or is it because they're looking for any economic benefit that they can find to be able to survive? And then what allowed for the opportunity for them to smuggle drugs for an economic benefit? Well, it's the drug laws. It's the drug laws. Without the criminalization of drugs, you wouldn't have the cartels running drugs. Prohibition creates a black market. We saw that in the 1920s. They put a prohibition on alcohol. It didn't work. It created more alcoholics. It created more crime. And it created impure alcohol. There were people dying from the ingesting of moonshine and different liquors because there were impurities in it. And you're getting the same thing with these drugs. They're not being manufactured in a way that is safe. Now, I know drugs can ruin somebody's life, but is it any less life-shattering to have the stigma of being arrested for possession of a substance? Is it any easier to find a job after you've served 10, 15 years in prison for possession of something? So is it moral? Is it just that the law is that they cannot possess these things? That they're not allowed to do this to their own body? It is their body. Who owns them? Do you own them? Does the federal government own them? Are we supposed to just live our lives as if we're a resource to the government? And I say no. I'm nobody's resource. Excuse me. I have something in my throat again. Maybe I should have brought some water instead of coffee. So when you're discussing these things, you have to look at it. Like, is the law, is this war on drugs, which I think in and of itself describes a lot of the problems we see with the police. The United States government has declared war on its own people. And you wonder why the police are becoming more militarized, why there are tanks at the police force. Because we're the enemy. Just the suspicion that we might have a plant in our possession, or a powder in our possession, or a needle, or some inanimate object, whatever it may be. Imagine if that object tomorrow became a pencil, or a pen, or a car, a shoelace. Does it make it just to enforce that law? A straw. Here's one. A straw. Should you be arrested, thrown in prison, and left ostracized by society because you own 5 straws? You had them in your pocket or in your purse or wherever. You had a straw, and now you're an enemy of the state. And 10 years down the road, when you get out of prison, you can't find a job because you're pure evil in the eyes of the state and those that worship it. Now, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm really trying to give you an example, because as soon as the state says that something is illegal, it is enforced at the threat of violence. Period. And I understand there's a genuine concern that immigrants are going to, quote unquote, take jobs from Americans in an ever expanding technological age in which there's a concern AI will be replacing a lot of jobs, a lot of workers in the job force. I can sympathize with this. I mean, I know change is scary. And I know no job is secure. It's not like it used to be. There's no loyalty in the job force. There's no more pensions. The government ruined that with Social Security. And you may have noticed that I started a podcast. And it's because I refuse to be in the business of waiting to be replaced by anyone or anything. And this isn't the only thing I'm doing. This is just what I've started with. And you gotta take a step back and look at it. The only thing you can control is yourself. You can't control what a company does. I mean, really, is the immigrant to be blamed for taking your job when the company you work for is the one that fired you and hired the immigrant? Maybe the company's to blame. The same company that is writing regulations to keep you from competing with the company. And the federal government is passing these regulations that allows that company to monopolize the workforce. If you have the skills that this company needs to stay in business, why don't you have the skills to start your own business? You can do it on your own. You don't need the company. And I'm certainly not in the business of calling for the largest government in history, known for imprisoning more of its own people than any other government in history, and killing children by the hundreds of thousands in foreign countries to save me or protect me from people, most of which only want a better life. Most of them are harmless people. The majority of them are harmless. And I'm not going to call for this murderous regime to come in and penalize these people. What did they do? All they're trying to do is survive. You know, there are websites out there like Skillshare, and I don't get paid for this. This is just something I've looked into. I think they charge like $15 a month. And you have individuals on there teaching like 45 minute classes on different things, whether it's computer programming or whatever, right? And if let's say you signed up for a month, so $15, you signed up for a month, and you spent every day, like you spent 1 week, 45 minutes a day for 7 days studying computer programming. And then the next week, 45 minutes a day, every day, 7 days, studying architecture. And 45 minutes a day the next week studying something else. And then the next week studying something else. You've learned 4 new skills. 4 new skills that you can start incorporating to start your own small business online, which is it's next to nothing to start a business. My wife started her own business. And I'm so proud to say that last Friday, she was able to step away and stop working for a boss. She's her own boss. She can accept or decline clients based upon her her availability and whether or not she wants to work with these people. And it took her, I don't know, 6 months, 5-6 months to get to this position, but she did it. So if you started learning new skills today, and then in a month or 2 months, you start a side hustle, a little business on the side, and you spend 6 months a year replacing the income you make in your current occupation, what would that freedom mean to you? The freedom to be on your own and independent and autonomous and not worried about whether or not, if you work for a small company, you always have to worry about the health of the owner of the company, because is the company going to survive if the owner has a heart attack and dies tomorrow? And if you work for a large corporation and they just decide, and they've made ill decisions in the past and they have to go through massive layoffs, you're depending on other people to take care of you, to provide for you. But instead, you're asking for the federal government to confiscate land from ranchers on the southern border in order to build this wall to keep out people that have no power. They're no threat to you. And in what you're doing is you're helping to create the environment for a black market, for the coyotes, for the cartel, to be smuggling drugs, to be smuggling individuals, to traffic children, to traffic women, to rape these women on the border or on the trek to the border. You're creating this environment by advocating for these policies. Like I said earlier, the black market pops up anywhere where you put arbitrary rules and regulations in place to stop something, to prohibit something. Prohibition is not defined by alcohol. Prohibition is defined by prohibiting something. You know, Portugal, in 2001, Portugal decriminalized every drug. They got rid of prohibition when it came to drugs. And as the culture shifted, they saw that there was less stigma. People weren't stigmatizing drugs as much as they had in the past. People were starting to fight addiction because they had the help available to them. They weren't afraid to be thrown in a cage, have their life ruined by the government. The transaction of AIDS went down from 142.5 per million to 4.2 per million in 14 years. This was by 2015. There's an article in The Guardian that talks about the history of this. It was published, I want to say it was May of 2017. The article is called, "Come on, Internet, work for me, baby." Here it is. Portugal's radical drug policy is working. Why hasn't the world copied it? It's written by Susana Ferreira. I don't know. Whatever. And it's a really good piece. It's a little lengthy, but it's good. It gets into the history of the problems that Portugal had, where they were experiencing, they were in a situation to where 1 out of every 100 people were addicted to heroin in Portugal. And they've cut that exponentially. And they get into the numbers, and I don't have them all memorized. I read the article a few weeks ago, and I don't have it all memorized, and I apologize. So when maybe I haven't convinced you that it's the companies and the federal government that need to be taking the blame for this, and not the immigrants themselves. So I'm gonna throw out a little bit of information here about some of the ways that the United States government has created this situation. Since the 1950s, when Eisenhower was president, the CIA has had directors like Allen Dulles. Now, Allen Dulles was sending covert ops into countries, overthrowing regimes and installing dictators that were friendly with his policies. Actually, most of those people, it was so they were friendly with his friends that were heading up corporations. I think it was United Fruit in Guatemala. And then you had, it was the British Iranian oil company in Iran. And he was sending in CIA operatives to overthrow these regimes so that his friends' corporations could confiscate all the resources and enrich the politicians and themselves. It doesn't help us any. You know, maybe it keeps prices a little bit artificially low on some products. Maybe. But we're not getting enriched by this. And then they're enslaving the people of these countries. And they're devastating these countries economically. I mean, we've seen it in Iran, Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Chile, Iraq. You know, the U.S. moves in through a corporation, through covert counter ops, takes control of resources, puts a boot on the neck of a country, and all this is done in silence. No one knew that we had soldiers in Niger until 4 special forces officers were killed. Nobody knew this. Why were we there? Why are we in Mali? Why are we in Somalia? Why are we assisting Al-Qaeda in Yemen? Why are we in Syria? Congress voted to not send troops to Syria, and Obama said, well, the CIA and the State Department want to get involved, so fuck you, Congress. I do what I want. You know, we know, everybody knows about the IRS targeting conservatives, running guns to cartels, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, lying about Libya, putting troops in Syria, sending SF into Niger, assisting in genocide in Yemen. Why is it beyond belief that they've caused these economic problems in these countries, including Honduras, which experienced a coup in 2009? And the Honduran people and the Guatemalan people in Venezuela, they all believe that the U.S. was involved in this coup in Honduras. I mean, they're involved in penalizing Venezuela for having politics that isn't friendly to the United States. So why wouldn't they start a coup in Honduras? Why? What makes us believe they have nothing to do with Bolsonaro, you know, being propped up in Brazil? You know, this coup had a direct impact on people. And now they're trying to escape Honduras. And you wonder why they're burning flags? Because they believe that the U.S. was involved. And Hillary Clinton's rhetoric on the situation, coming out saying that it was a good thing that the Honduras government was overthrown, doesn't help with the fact that people believe that America had something to do with it. No one's come out and admitted that America had something to do with it, but usually it's about 20 or 30 years before these documents get retained through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, and we find out what was actually going on. So I have a serious issue with the citizens of this country arguing amongst themselves about immigrants that are trying to better themselves. Number one, because if you were in their situation, you'd be doing the exact same thing. You'd be trying to figure out a way to make your life better, to make your children's life better, to make your grandchildren's life better. Okay? But number two, it's because you're pointing the finger at each other as if they have the people that you're arguing with don't have the power to change the regulations, to change these things. It's the corporations, the companies that are hiring these immigrants and firing you, and the federal government creating this situation. But your answer, your response to it is to blame the immigrant or to blame the Democrats or whoever. And the Democrats are no better blaming, conservatives for wanting to build a wall. I understand some of the consequences that are going on, but the problem is we're not getting to the root of the problem. We're not cutting the head off the snake. You're addressing a symptom. You're not addressing the cause. And if you really want national sovereignty for the United States, you should at least demand that your government recognizes the national sovereignty of other countries and keeps their fucking nose out of these other countries' business. Now, the idea of creating a federal government was that the government was not to have any power which an individual didn't possess. Which means I can't go to my neighbor's house, kick in their door, and tell them what religion or how to run their family at the threat of violence any more than I can give the federal government permission to do that elsewhere, because it's not a right I possess to give. So we should really be focused on the heart of the problem, which starts within the State Department, within our federal government, within the U.S. foreign policy, and stop bickering amongst ourselves. And it's nice to see that France had figured this out with the yellow jacket march, in which the right and the left united together, blaming the people that were in charge, saying, hey, you're the motherfuckers that are causing this bullshit. You're the ones putting 100% tax on diesel. And until the American people learn the lesson that the citizens within this country that have zero power whatsoever are not the enemies, that the enemies are standing at the head of state, manipulating you like puppets to fight amongst yourselves while they work behind the curtain to do unconstitutional, immoral shit. Again, a subjective word, but while they're doing this shit behind the scenes in silence without you having any idea what's going on, because you're too busy worried about what your neighbor thinks about abortion or immigration or this, that, or the other. Well, until we get these fuckers out of our lives, we're not going to be able to organize our communities anyway. So the idea is to get rid of these fuckers, to take the power back from them. And that doesn't start or happen because you're, owning the libs or whatever the fuck the term is, melting snowflakes or whatever the hell you are trying to do nowadays. It comes by the citizens, the ordinary average people working together in congruence to take power from the federal government and telling the federal government to fucking kick dirt. Because we don't need them. They cause more grief than they have spread liberty. We can have a lot more liberty on a communal level by organizing amongst ourselves within our communities, whether that's, a subdivision if you're in like a place like Houston or a city block or however you want to organize, and policing yourselves and figuring it out on your own. But so many people have been led to believe that the only answer to all the problems in the world is to get government to do it. Well, I promise you, every time government says it's going to solve a problem, it's causing a new one somewhere that they hope that you'll ask them to solve. And that's what's been going on. So that's kind of my take on the whole immigration thing. I think people are just pointing their vehemence in the wrong direction. And I think until you get a historical view of why these things are taking place and what's happening, that you're just spinning your wheels and you're not doing any good. You're not blaming the right people. You're not getting to the heart of the matter. And you're not going to kill a snake by cutting its tail off. You have to stop putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and get to the heart of the problem. You have to quit treating the symptoms. You have to treat the disease. And the disease is in Washington, D.C. That's where it all roots from. Well, this was fun. It was a lot better than what I was thinking about releasing for tomorrow. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. I look forward to your comments on the situation, on the subject. And, well, that was Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.